helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elim Counselling Services.
Hi, I'm Michael Hart, Director of Elim Counselling Services, a Christian counseling ministry in Ottawa. And we want to thank you for joining us in this episode of the Life Transformation radio show. As usual, we have another interesting show lined up for you today. And with me in studio today is Sylvie and Edward Teague, the authors of the book Behind the Darkest Hour, Where Hope Lies. I know life is filled with challenges, and this book paints a very vivid picture of a family's tragedies and how they work their way through it. So stay tuned. It's going to be a very interesting and exciting show. Thank you very much for joining me in studio today, Sylvie and
It's
Edward.
our pleasure.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for being here. So when I read this book, it talks about your journey through a very tragic experience, a tragic experience in which in September 2005, your daughter Jennifer one night didn't come home, was missing, and then 10 days later, after a long and intensive search, she was discovered dead, that she was abducted and murdered. And you have recently released this book called Behind the Darkest Hour, Where Hope Lies. And the book takes us through the story of your family from that first telephone call. You explained how you were just at home one night. It was just an irregular night. And then there was this telephone call. And from the reaction when Edward took that call, Sylvie, you said in the book that you could picture that something was wrong with the response, how his body language. Take me through those first few moments after that phone call and what that was like to receive that call that night.
Well, it was late at night, and it was unusual to be having a call. Most people don't call after certain hours, and so that raised the tension right away. The conversation was quite unusual. Again, he didn't speak as much as he was listening, and when he had finished the call and came to bed, he was very quiet. And that again raised, questions like what is going on. So it was just very curious, the whole thing from the phone call. Right. And then to hear him say that Jenny hadn't come home, it was okay, so that's not normal. She was very responsible, so it was definitely not something we would have expected to hear.
So the circumstances were different, and in the book you talk about the fact that she had actually called to say that she would be coming home and that you should lay out her PJs, I think you said, for her.
Yeah, she wanted to have her PJs laid out.
Right, so when she didn't come home, alarm bells started ringing right away.
Right.
So that's a kind of parent's worst nightmare, right, that you went through at that time, to have your daughter not show up from work, not knowing where she is, and then for the next few days, there's still not knowing what had happened to her. When I read the book, I get this very clear picture of a family that has a very strong belief in God, and that you started seeking God's face right away, started praying for her safety. And I from the book, it showed that you weren't the only ones praying, that you had people around you. Tell me more about the support that you had and people who were helping you through this very difficult first period of this experience.
Well, we had the support of our home church in Brockville at the time, but we had previously attended churches here in Ottawa, and we had their support as well, and they were very quick to go to prayer. And we have a very, very special friend. Can I mention her by name?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Sister Rose Fraser, and she's a very dear friend of ours, and she is part of a larger prayer group, and they really went to prayer heavily on our behalf, and that to us was a great comfort.
Yeah, she's the first person I thought to call because she is so close to us, so precious, and she's a very strong person when it comes to prayer, and believes heavily in that, as do we. And so we called on her first of all. because we were hoping she would have some comforting words, right? You know, you're kind of uncertain what's going on, but in the end, you know, God knows what's going on. So, you know, we called on her first to pray. So we found that our faith and having the support of the faith community was basically our backbone for survival during those times.
It was very, very important for you that you had people praying. And so you had a lot of people praying. You were praying. I didn't know you at the time, but when I heard about the case, my wife and I were believers. We started praying as well. So a lot of prayers was going up. And in those few days when she went missing, the prayer was for her safety. That I think, am I right?
That's
that
correct.
everyone was praying for her to be found alive and that she was okay. But as it turned out, 10 days later, her body was discovered. And I think this was a challenge for a lot of people where they felt so many people were praying. She's such a young and innocent. She was just 18 years of age. Why couldn't God have intervened and answered the prayer? How do you reconcile your faith, the faith in a loving God with such a tragedy that was allowed to enter your life?
Well, there's a couple things. Initially, you don't want to feel that something horrible is wrong. So we prayed for safety, bring Jenny home. After the first few days, I think it was on the Tuesday night, when we decided, because we were playing in our minds all the different scenarios.
Yes.
And every scenario we rehearsed brought Jenny home, but she still wasn't home. So the bottom line for us was to really trust God. He knew what had happened. We had to come to the realization that it is possible, as much as we didn't want to let our minds go there. We had to come to the realization that it is possible that something really tragic had happened to Jenny. Otherwise, she would be home. And it was on the Tuesday that we were in the sanctuary of the church that hosted the command post that we were praying again and singing some songs. And it was a very emotional time during that night in the sanctuary. And we talked a little bit, and we finally decided to actually utter the words that she may not be alive. And I think that was the first time we allowed ourselves to believe that.
It's a very scary place that you didn't want to go. That was
absolutely.
Very,
so we kind of kept that. We thought we were trusting God, but we kind of kept that to ourselves because, like, you don't want to give that up because she's still safe.
She's still safe.
But when we came to the realization that is possible, it's been, you know, the Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and still all this is going on. Everybody's looking, and still no Jenny. And Ed, and I mentioned this in the book, the prayer that he prayed. I don't know if he recalls the prayer. He finally turned it over to God and said, you know, even if we just get her body back, we want her back. We realized that it's been too long. And the lead detective had also said, you know, the first couple of days is pretty important, and we had gone way past that, and he mentioned that in his prayer as well. So now we need you to do something, even if it's just getting her body back, because we didn't want to be one of the families that had no answers. And so we had come to that point where we realized, even if it's just that, it was still an answer.
So your prayer focus had shifted a little bit to accepting the reality of the situation, and that God, whatever it is, if it worse is the worst, would like her body back. And Ed, in the book, he talked about the fact that you were a fairly new believer at the time. You had recently committed your life to God and was involved in prayer meetings and so forth at your church. And shortly after that, this tragedy entered your life. Now, a lot of people would see this as an opportunity to be bitter. Here I am giving my life to God, surrendering myself to God, and then at the same time, this unfortunate thing happened. How did you reconcile what happened with the tragedy that happened with your newfound faith?
I don't think that I ever thought of blaming God for what had happened. Mm-hmm. We knew that whatever had happened, it was created by man. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know that there's evil in the world, there's evil in people.
Right.
And people act out their evil thoughts and their evil mm-hmm. deeds. Mm-hmm. And to blame God, that's ridiculous. God is the source of good. He's there to protect us against the evil as much as possible. Mm-hmm. But he also allows us that one thing that man has had from the very beginning, free will. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was free will of the young man that killed my daughter that allowed him to go ahead and do that. You can't blame that on God.
Right. So you didn't get to a place where you think, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? You saw this as an outworking of people's free will, and the fact that we're in a sin-cursed world. Is that how you looked at it? Bad things happen?
Ultimately, God did answer our prayers.
Okay.
He delivered our daughter back to us.
Okay.
And he mentioned that actually in a couple of the interviews, and people asked him, how can you say that God answered? And he's like, we have Jenny back. Yeah. And that was an answer. We're not looking anymore. We know mm-hmm. we know something happened. We know what happened. Mm-hmm. And then from there we went on to, okay, God, now we need to know who did this.
Right. So the book explains that God dramatically answered this prayer for not only for her body to be found, but you're also praying for her for whoever it was to come forward and to confess to the crime.
Absolutely.
And so I just read a little part here from the book where it says, quote, "We understood that unresolved murders existed in life. However, we didn't want Jenny's murder to be among them. Each day we hoped for word on who had committed this crime. 4 months had passed without answers, but our hopes had not failed, and neither had our prayers for answers. We had become desperate like Jacob, who wrestled with the angel of God and would not let go." So your faith was still very, very strong, praying to God for God to answer your prayer in a different way, that her body would be found and that the killer would come forward. Take me to this part in the book where you talk about this dramatic way in which that prayer was answered when the killer, Kevin Davis, actually came out and talked about.
Well, we had just been participating in a golf tournament at Sylvie's old company. We were invited to go there. It was a holiday Monday, so we went and we were playing golf and we were talking to people. They said, "Oh, we hope they hope they catch that guy." And we got a phone call, mm-hmm. and it was the lead detective, Detective Sergeant Greg Brown, and he says, "I think we got a break in the case," and he just said, "You better come on down."
Mm. Yeah, we had just finished telling all our friends, well, we haven't heard anything recently. It's been a while, since we heard from Greg. And mm-hmm. they're like, yeah, we hope they catch a guy, because this can't go on, they said. Mm-hmm. And we're just driving home. We're on the highway, and his Ed's cell phone rang. Right. And it was that was incredible.
Yes.
Because we were just talking about it.
Right. And I think even previous to that, there were the book explains that Kevin Davis, I'll just read here a little snapshot again. Kevin Davis was a 24-year-old pizza maker who was not able to come to terms with his guilt. Police apprehended him while he was running through a Barhaven neighborhood, stark naked, repeatedly yelling at the top of his voice, "I killed Jennifer Teague." And to me, that is just a remarkable story of how God answered your prayer in such a dramatic way. How often do you hear things like that happening?
That's right. And actually, at the time, we didn't even know about that incident.
Okay.
Nobody had mentioned it to us. We hadn't read that in the papers. And so we were still praying for, God to do something. Meanwhile, God was working. Yes. And we didn't know about that first incident, because it did happen. That incident happened, and then 2 weeks later, he turned himself in. He tapped a guy on the shoulder in a local store in the Barhaven area, and that turned out to be an off-duty police officer as well, which he obviously didn't know. But
it's another miracle. What's the chance of that happening?
It was, exactly.
Yes.
So, babe.
Yeah, the incident with the young man, we knew about it because we heard it on the news, but it was never the full story was never revealed on the news. It just said that a man had been running through Barhaven stark naked, and it turns out he was on what they call a magic mushroom trip, and of course when the police went to question him, they have to wait until he comes down. That's just the law. You can't question him under the influence.
Right.
And he just said, no, I didn't say that.
Okay.
But I think that put him right at the top of the radar.
Right.
You know, that put him right at the top of the list of possible suspects.
Yes.
And it was just a matter of time. If God was working that way on his mind already, God wasn't going to let it go at that. He was going to continue to finish the job. And he did. And
that was your prayer, right, for God to convict whoever it was with guilt so that they would confess. So your prayers were answered very dramatically. If you just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show, and I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services. And with me in studio today is Sylvie and Edward Teague, authors of the book Behind the Darkest Hour, Where Hope Lies, a book that tells a story of how God has turned unbelievable and unimaginable tragedy into a story of hope, where now this book is giving hope to a lot of people, and I believe not just in Ottawa but around the world. If you haven't picked up a copy of this book yet, then I would encourage you to do so. I started reading it this week and I've already finished. I was unable to put it down, so I encourage you to look for a copy of this book. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about forgiveness, because you said in the book that you had forgiven your daughter's killer even before he came forward. I think you said, whoever it is, I want you to know that I have forgiven you. How were you able to come to this point of forgiving someone who had so brutally murdered your daughter?
I'm not even sure it was a conscious thought on my part. I was delivering the eulogy at my daughter's funeral, and I just said, my daughter forgives you and I forgive you, but you're going to have to turn yourself in.
Was that hard? Were there times when you struggled with anger and a bitterness, or did you just always knew in your heart that I have forgiven this? Because for some people, forgiveness is a process. What was it like with you?
Actually, once I uttered those words, I felt a great sense of relief, because I knew that by forgiving him, I was also being forgiven myself. Because how can we go to God and ask for forgiveness if we're not willing to forgive?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And was it the same for you, Sylvie? You found it easier to forgive from the very beginning?
It's funny because one of my brothers asked me, you can't be angry all the time. I'm like, no, I realize that. He's like, have you forgiven? I said, yes. He goes, are you sure?
Right.
I said, yes. So he asked me, he said, so if God said to go and visit, I'm like, well, if God said that, he would have to give me whatever it takes to go and visit him. And so, I don't think it's something we actually, forgiveness is what we actually struggled with.
Okay.
So.
So that's remarkable, because I'm sure a lot of people listening to the radio show today would say that if they were in that situation, it would be very hard for them to...
And understandably so,
to
yes.
forgive. But you were able to forgive and have no bitterness from the very beginning of this process.
And I think also, like, when you read the book, you'll understand that we had already been going through some things.
Yes.
So we'd already... put ourselves in a position for God to deal with us. So I don't think that not forgiving was actually an option we had. Right? So
you talk about already going through some things. When I read the book, I get the picture that your family were you were going through a Job-like experiences. You talked about the fact that you were ill the year before. Thought it might have been cancer. Then you had this very tragic experience with your daughter being killed, and then there was one day you talked about the accident where you were driving back from the cemetery and you hit something. How, when you were going through this series of things, like what was this like for you? Just one thing after another, because I got a sort of picture that, like, at that time it was a little bit challenging to see what
it was beginning to mount up, and but you also have to remember we had friends that supported us. We were able to talk about things, and I think that's the key, is having that support. Because if it was just the two of us, we wouldn't be able to handle it. But we always knew there was somebody praying for us. We always knew there was somebody we can go to just to sit and talk. They would just listen. Like, even if we didn't want to talk, we could just sit and do nothing, which is important to have that place that you can go to and be away from everything that's crowding your mind. And I think we had that, and I think that helped a lot. When we did hit that, whatever it was, we still have no idea, ripped the whole front end of our vehicle. And because usually I'm the lookout at night, and we had just gotten off the phone, and he mentioned Rose Fraser. We just got off the phone with her, and she said, everything's going to be all right. And we were crying, and so my eyes were like really blurred over. I didn't see whatever it was. And I think it was at that point Ed said, God, how much more can we take? And I think that was the only time we actually came to that statement, because it just seemed like a lot, so it was like, how much more? And it's just like one more thing we had to turn over to him.
So you went deeper in prayer, and your faith was very helpful in getting you through that. And then you had these weird experiences, especially in the beginning while the search was going on, where you talked about weird letter and psychic prediction. What was that part of the journey like for you?
Well, we had people calling us. My wife is a psychic, and she's got a picture of Jenny in a basement in Niagara Falls. And I said, well, yeah, that's nice, but we didn't believe that. And then there were psychics that wanted us to bring clothing down to them. Right. And we just said no. We don't believe in that. That to us, maybe there are people that believe in psychics, but to us it was almost like a little bit of witchcraft, and we just said no, we don't believe in that.
So to add to what you were going on, then you had these spiritual challenges where it's a spiritual warfare where you're being offered a different way of coming to answers. Okay, so I want to ask you, when you're sitting in that courtroom, like, it's one thing to say you forgive a person when you don't have the face, but when you're sitting in that courtroom and you see the look in the killer's eyes, and you are looking face to face at this person, was there a time during that courtroom episode where you felt rage, where you felt as if you didn't want to forgive this person?
No, I stared at him the entire trial.
It's remarkable.
As a matter of fact, Earl McRae, bless his soul, he said, Ed, you never took your eyes off him. And I said, no, because I wanted to look into his eyes. I wanted to see him. I wanted to see him when he talked.
Yes.
And I think I kind of unsettled him a bit.
Okay.
I hope I did. But that was just to unsettle him, and that wasn't to...
Yes, you want him to look at you and to see what he had done to your family.
Acknowledge me that, yes, I did this to your daughter.
Yes.
But we never got that satisfaction out of him.
Okay.
He kind of painted himself as a normal 24-year-old. Which we know that normal 24-year-olds don't go out and kill somebody.
Yeah.
Because they want to see what it feels like.
Yeah, it's quite not normal. And then you had this... incident, this experience in the courtroom where when all of these gory details were being read through of what happened to your daughter, and my heart ached when I think of what that must be like as a parent to sit there and to listen to that. And then you mentioned that God comforted you in a miraculous way. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what happened in the courtroom?
I envisioned an angel that, as Kevin Davis, I hope I can say his name, I just said
yes, absolutely.
Was describing all that he had done, that there was an angel that was with Jenny through those hours. Mm-hmm. And so I asked the question, did she know that her life was no longer in the hands of a killer, but hands of God, because I believe God was there with her. So, and to me, that was a great comfort in knowing she was not alone that night.
So you envisioned an angel
yes.
there symbolizing, saying to you that he was with Jenny on the
Correct.
night when that happened.
Yeah.
And that brought you, I can imagine, great comfort
It did.
That point in time. So God ministered to you just at a point when you were probably at your weakest.
Because that was horrendous to hear all that.
Yes. Unfortunately, we have quickly run out of time. The half hour has gone by very quickly. But I want to thank you so much for coming on this show today and for sharing your story, a story of resilience, story of faith, story of trust in God, story of how a person can overcome hardship through putting their trust in God. And is there anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up today, like anything, or to tell people how they can get a hold of a copy of the book?
Well, the story is one of hope and forgiveness, and I hope that does come out when people read it. They can get it at they can order it through any of the local bookstores. They can get it online at Amazon, or they can order it directly from the publisher at westbowpress.com.
Okay, so thank you very much for coming on the show today, and God bless you. God bless you both.
Thank you.
And to all the listeners out there, thank you very much for listening to this version of the Life Transformation Radio Show. You can also find a podcast of this radio show on our website at elimcounselingministry.com.
I also want to mention the book launch on March 14th at 6:30. There's tickets available for that as well.
Absolutely. So until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart, praying that God would grant you happiness in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart. God bless you all.